So it appears that another soul has come to me in search of the riddle of death. Very well then. Which death shall it be? Yes, it shall indeed be a very good death. Nay, a great death. A death that makes existence worthy of life itself.
I'm going to take you in through each shot of this, and I'm going to explain to you why. They say that the eyes are the window to the soul. And what is he saying in the dialogue? So it appears that another soul has come to me. So we start with closed eye, right? Really tight on the character. Then we suddenly burst open the eye, and the eye is looking around and blinking rapidly. We've got an open hand that symbolizes that you don't have anything, and then the closed hand, when a newborn is born on earth, they're holding on to life. Here, you've got an open hand that has something. What is the open hand holding? Death. Although it's holding the skull, it's symbolic that his hand is open and it's dead. It's holding death. And the minute it crushes that skull, and it seemingly has nothing except for the cloth and the remains of whatever was in the skull, it actually has life, because it's come and possessed into this guy here. And then now you might ask yourself, well, the audience is not going to get all of that. They're just going to watch it the way you watched it when you first watched. Well, maybe on a surface level they won't. But what makes some characters much better than others is there's a deeper unconscious understanding connection between the audience. This is a scene that deals with something that all human beings deal with, which is life and death. There's going to be two people watching this audience. There's going to be animation fans and people who love Disney or anime and isn't that cool. But underneath their more higher mind intellect, which is what most filmmakers and advertisers are trying to speak to. They don't really want to speak to the surface dweller. This is the way it's always been done. When you tell a story, you're literally telling a story to the outer person and the inner person. I'm going to put that line through my character. It can be behind my character in this case because there's only one character. So the audience is the camera. This camera can move here and it can move here. And everything will be of coherent understanding to us. So the hand could be considered, if you really want to take this further and really get to the bottom so you don't get lost with this line. You have to think about the constant maintaining axes of action between the two subjects. His hand is almost like a character, so the axis of action is going to be between here. So we are going to be shooting his head from this side, and we're going to be shooting his hand from that side, right? And we can see basically all of the camera moves that are happening in the scene are all going to be around that space. He's now lifted this hand, and he's holding this skull, which is another subject and another character, and the pan has happened, and the axes of action between him and the skull are now going to be a shot and reverse shot on this side of the line concerning that. When I was working for Universal Pictures, I would sit with the director of the film, and he was not concerned with drawing nice compositions or storyboards. He was more interested in giving me that job, but he would draw a little map telling me what he wanted for camera direction and camera orientation. So he was concerned with camera orientation and direction. But at the moment, we're just going to be extremely simple. So this is camera 1, right? Camera 1 is giving us an extreme close-up, right, of the tiger's face, the tiger's head. If you want to look in terms of the direction of the flow of the scene, the hand is traveling away from his face, traveling screen right, and continues to move screen right and comes in from screen left. Then as we look here, we see the hand traveling back from screen right, and then the camera moves towards the direction where the hand was going. So we're continuing the direction of the hand in this conversation, which then brings in the skull. Now as the hand is coming back and talking back to him, he's lifting this hand, and the 180 degree line, its axis is rotating this way with the camera pan. And then we cut to a close-up of the skull, which is also an over-the-shoulder shot. So now we have changed the direction of the 180 degree line. Similarly, we could look at it and explore the idea of what would happen if we go tighter on the hand and we go tighter faster. So can you see how now you can change the way a character feels by what you're doing with the camera move? Staging is basically the entire scene and how it plays out. So the characters, the environment is very important. You know, if a director can walk around the set in live action, he'll get really, so say the director's standing here, right? And this is a real set, right? He'll be like, I've got this great angle that I can use here. I can maybe dolly the camera around this pillar here. I like to do it from an axonometric point of view because it's a little bit more revealing. So if you have a 180 degree line and you have a 90 degrees angle, depending on the degrees that you have between the angles, is for example, that's going to be where our set is, right? So we make a box. An isometric, I believe, don't quote me on this, it's been a long time, would be 30 degrees here. Now an axonometric would be, this is the 90 degrees angle, would be exactly 45 degrees here. What I have here is I have now a guide. So this is the building of the set. So this won't be in your film, but I have taken some time to show you how to build a set because it's important, because it helps you with orientation. What am I trying to say with the positive and negative space? And we're also going to talk about another subject, the depth, right? The depth of the shot. When I think about these three things, everything comes into play. One thing you can do is you can shift focus between background plane, midground plane, and foreground plane. So, for example, he might be blurred and the skull might be in sharp focus, right? Or we may start with him in sharp focus and the skull blurred, and then what we call do a focus rack and make him blurred and then focus on the skull. So he's almost like imprisoned with prison bars. So you see how this is what dictates my choice of shot composition, not am I within the rule of thirds or the golden triangle. Now you can immediately see that I'm framing within the frame. He opens his hand to create a triangle, and again we have got a circle of his eye. And also the pattern on him also helps other shapes. So we've got the circle of his eye within this diamond within a triangle, which creates a very nice piece of imagery. Also, we want to think about, remember I talk about symbolism, the Illuminati or enlightened symbol, triangle with an eye in it. There's all this negative space here, which is boring. Curved line, just making the space around it like that. If this we were talking about tone, this would all be kind of black and the skull would be white. This will really help us read there in the tone thing. So we've shaded the foreground to make it readable, right? That's not really the lighting of filmmaking though. That's one aspect of a storyboard artist using contrast to make things read. Everything is neutral, right? I've only used darks just to help things read. So basically it's almost like animation layout. It's extremely clean. It's really well drawn. It's the background. The compositions are really well thought out. But there is no thought of art direction in terms of shadows or lighting or anything like that. And as a storyboard artist for this storyboard, I've chosen to not do that. So that is a way that we can do a little bit of art direction using lights and darks, brightness and contrast, exposure and underexposure, exposure level. We've highly exposed the characters because we want them to read. We're not thinking about shadow on the character's body yet. Now we can see from this shot here the skull. Let's isolate that. The skull is looking down on our man, but we can see the skull shadow in this shot telling the story, right? Heightening the tone. You'll understand how to make your backgrounds read. So you won't just say I'll blur the background because it looks nice in a digital painting. You'll say I'll blur the background to give it the feel of a wide angle, a zoom lens as opposed to a prime lens or a telephoto macro lens. Imagine this is your camera, right? So the shorter the focal length, the wider everything is going to be. The longer the focal length, the less of that you're going to see, right? If you've got a good eye and you say, well, I want this shot to be like this and this and this, you could intuitively and instinctively carry on doing your work and it'll look great. But I feel that if you want to get more cinematic, right? It depends how cinematic you want to be with your project. Then I would say, rather than learning the names of all the characters of a series like Game of Thrones or Stranger Things, learn your lenses. As I talked about this, I talked about the different kinds of editing. I talked about continuity editing, spatial editing, and temporal editing, the classic Hollywood editing, right? I also talked about a Soviet montage editing. But that is more abstract. The most important one of Soviet montage being the insertion and juxtaposition of weird things that are irrelevant, that kind of lead the viewer into thinking other things. This is classic Hollywood filmmaking, which is typical mise-en-scene, which is, I touched on this at the beginning, and I'm going to end with it as well. What good storyboarding requires, and what good filmmaking requires, what's essential is planning, preparation. So this is staging. We even in the shot setup, so even in this scene, he's messed up, he's imprisoned, he's a prisoner of his mind, right? So even in this scene, which isn't even establishing shot, we've got all these bars and stripes and we're giving the mood even without the revealing of the character. And here we see the cobblestones. Everything about this character is about being in prison. So his clothes are kind of like tattered. He's not what he was. He's got stripes all over him. So this is all staging. So we're taking everything. We're taking props. We're taking lighting. We're taking costume. We're taking angles and framing. Even in one image, we want to try and immediately say this is what it is. So that's what, the flashy word for it is mise-en-scene. But this to animators we know as the law of staging. This is the law that we have not really touched on in real animator training. And I'm now feeling so empowered as it's so obvious as it's come on to me as I've wanted to make this lecture on storyboarding dialogue. It is storyboard, the law of staging. Because that's essentially what we have covered in these 7 lectures. How to stage a scene, understanding the tools that we're going to use to stage that scene. This has been an absolutely amazing lecture series for the Pro Archive of the Real Animator Training Library. I hope you've learned a lot from it.